Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you. It's very loud, isn't it? It's okay? Just sounds like that. Okay. Thank you very much for staying here for so long. It's always fun to be the last speaker on any type of event, so I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jan. No, I'm joking. I'm very glad that you're still here. And I think that my talk is kind of a nice conclusion to this event because it touches upon, our urging issue, in my opinion, to focus more on contextual cues, large-scale trends in society, rather than individual-level interventions. And that is really what I will focus on today. So I don't think I need to repeat this too much. Disinformation has been identified as one of the most immediate threats for societies and globally. And the pandemic, like no other public health crisis, really exemplifies how misinformation to more of an extent spreads than official health information, as you, for instance, can see here. But I think I will not focus too much on that because all the other presentations gave very good background information. But I will say that since the pandemic, I think things have actually gotten worse. So, for instance, if you take a look at the so-called super spreaders, who really account for the large share of misinformation that is being spread online, you can see that since Elon Musk took over, their activity has really increased by a lot. So it doesn't look good. And also, it doesn't really help if the president of one of the so-called leading democracies of the Western world holds entire speeches that are being fact-checked as mostly containing fake information, false information. Okay, and the starting point to the work that I'm going to present next is that interventions do work, but their effect is generally, I would say, too weak. We can discuss that. So some of the studies or intervention methods that we focus on today include media literacy education, fact-checking, content moderation, debunking, pre-bunking or inoculation, and so-called cognitive reflection prompts. And meta-analytic work suggests that although we do find a significant effect across studies, the average effect is really small. And I would say it's way smaller than the effect of misinformation, which probably is about a D of 1 or something like that. Right? So this is probably not the solution in itself to the problems that we are facing. And that's why I think we need to move from intervention to prevention by identifying and addressing the root causes of misinformation. And here I want to encourage you and take your present two studies that kind of connect misinformation to larger mega trends in society. And the first mega trend, which is quite apparent to everybody, including in Poland, is the trend of political polarization. So if you just take a look at the United States and the ideological leanings of both Democrats and Republicans, you can really see that there are large-scale changes over time. So, even 1980s, these two parties or party-affiliated individuals were already quite different, markedly so. But you can see year after year, this has really been increasing. So the polarization is off the charts at the moment. And you can argue this is only the case for the US, or particularly so. However, if you look at, for instance, data from 31 countries from the European Union, or from Europe, not the European Union, but including many European Union countries, you can see that far-right populist parties in light blue and far-left populist parties have been increasing in voting share systematically over time. So then the question is whether this megatrend can be empirically linked to conspiracy beliefs. And this is one of the questions that I think we can answer by a paper we published last year as part of this Polish-Norwegian collaboration. So what we did in the study is that we had a representative sample of US Twitter users. Back then it was still called Twitter. We had their data points over the platform for the most intense parts of the pandemic, which included 7.7 million behavioral data points. And these could be likes, retweets, comments, posts, etc. And this type of data in itself would not really be very unique because there's a lot of Twitter data sets, social media data sets out there that can be utilized by scholars around the world. But in addition to this social media information, we also had their psychological self-report data and quite extensive information in this regard. So what we then were interested in is whether in multi-level modeling, the psychological self-report data of participants would predict how they behaved on social media, and specifically whether their social media engagements supported different types of COVID-19 conspiracy theories. So in order to be able to test this, we obviously had to do something with the textual information we get from Twitter, and that meant that we developed a classifier, which was relatively straightforward once we started using an established model, namely the GPT 3.5 Turbo model. Nowadays very outdated, but back then it was relatively cutting edge. And we developed a classifier and validated it, which performed relatively well, as you can see here. I mean, remember, conspiracy theories are quite elusive. It's not as easy as just, let's say, solidarity or something like this. It's a very vague construct, which is very broad. So it was not easy, but I think the F1 values are not bad for this. In terms of psychological and political variables, I will not go too much into detail on them, but we measured participants' political orientation by a classic scale from 1 to 11, where 1 means extremely liberal left-wing, and 11 means extremely conservative right-wing. We also measured their party affiliations, or whether they felt that they were Republican, Democrat, etc. Then we included other variables that have been linked to misinformation susceptibility before, such as a need for chaos, narcissism, denialism, conspiracy mentality, which is interesting because that is a construct which is supposed to capture people's individual differences and tendencies to believe in conspiracy theories. We measured their tendency to perceive in false and true information using the Cambridge MIST scale. They believe in information reliability, attitudes towards verifying information, perceived self-efficacy in recognizing information. But all these variables don't really matter because the only thing that consistently predicted in our models was political orientation. So you can see for 3 of the 6 conspiracy theories, we find a curvilinear effect where both people on the left and right, and I'm talking specifically on the extreme left and extreme right of the political spectrum, endorsed and spread these conspiracy theories online, which is quite striking given that we have been studying so many variables, introduced them to the field, psychological constructs, and at least in this study, it's 1 data point, we have to do more research, but they don't seem very predictive. What really matters is the political division in groups and society. So that finding really shows me that the trend of political polarization is intertwined with the spread of conspiracy theories online. Of course, it's probably a reciprocal relationship, but I do think that a lot of it goes from political polarization to conspiracy beliefs as well. Okay, so the second study that I'm going to focus on is trying to connect conspiracy beliefs to another mega trend, namely the loneliness epidemic. So if you look at different generations, for instance, in the United States, I'm sure you have heard these terms before. You may even identify as one of them. I think I'm a millennial. And you can see that from generation to generation, people are more lonely. And the effects are relatively marked. Now you could say again, the United States, hardcore capitalist society, that's where you really observe these types of effects. But even if you look at World Values Survey data, which is usually conducted with 50 to 60 countries, you can see that, for instance, in school, people have over the years become more lonely, especially girls, but you see it also for boys. And also in most parts of the most cultural regions of the world, it's probably going to be hard for you to see, Orthodox, English-speaking, Latin American, worldwide average. Let's focus on the worldwide average. You see that that has really been increasing over time as well. So it is an epidemic that can be observed in many parts of the world. And we were interested in whether this mega trend could be linked to conspiracy beliefs. And there are several theoretical reasons why we thought that could be the case. And the first is a sense-making function. And that is that conspiracy beliefs may help lonely people make sense of their loneliness in a way that protects their self-image. Okay? There could be some type of ego protection, meaning it's basically not my fault that I became lonely, but society is against me. There are evil forces that contributed to this situation. And in addition, some evidence suggests that believing in conspiracy theories might also make you feel special, make you feel unique, and thereby bolster your self-image. Another point which I think is very important and we should not forget is if you get lonely and you isolate yourself, you lack social feedback. You're not confronted as much with people, with a general population anymore. That means that if you utter certain opinions, or there's nobody who will correct you because you don't speak as much to people to say it like that. And alternatively, lonely people might then seek online communities, groups of like-minded individuals, and join these type of echo chambers. Okay, so we tested it in a study also published last year. And what we did here is that we had a population-based sample of Norwegian individuals who were followed almost 3 decades from adolescence into midlife, meaning they were about 16 years old when they completed wave 1, and they were, I think, 45 on average when they completed wave 5. At each of these time points, we assessed their loneliness using the UCLA loneliness scale, and in mid-adulthood, we also assessed their conspiracy mentality. And then we used latent growth curve modeling to test for associations between both constructs. And this is how the model looks like. I'm not going to go too much into the statistical details, but I'm just going to tell you that both the intercept and the linear slope were positively correlated with conspiracy worldview in mid-adulthood, but I will explain to you what that means. So basically, the fact that the intercept is correlated with conspiracy worldview means that the starting point of loneliness, the degree of loneliness that people experience during adolescence, is 3 decades later predicting their degree of conspiracy beliefs. Okay, so that is the first finding. In addition, the fact that the slope is positively associated with conspiracy worldview means that participants who became more lonely over time, right? These are also individuals that show increased beliefs in conspiracy worldview as adults. So again, I think that this kind of work at least provides quite strong indications for that trends such as the loneliness epidemic really need to inform our approach to hindering and preventing misinformation and conspiracy beliefs. So therefore, my main argument here is that we need to move from intervention to systemic prevention. Just to briefly summarize, I do believe there is a place for interventions, but we need to remember that their effects is usually very small. And a very important point that John Rosenberg is making is it's going to be very hard to get people to, and those that believe the most in misinformation, that's related to what you just commented in terms of the app, these are the least likely to be interested in participating in any type of intervention in the real world, and they probably will be less receptive to it as well. So there's a lot of problems with a sole focus on interventions, and interventions, at least the most interventions that we have been focusing on, they individualize the problem, right? It's all up to the individual. We can strengthen this person's resilience, but maybe it's not that simple. So therefore, I believe that to more efficiently address the rise of misinformation and conspiracy theories, we should focus more on root causes. And I think that a good idea is to look into the big mega trends that characterize society and the world at the moment. That's everything. Thank you so much. Yeah, please. What do you do if those who believe in conspiracy theories are better in convincing other people? Yeah, but I think the general point is good, right? So that society is getting more and more fractionalized, right? And it is good for people from different segments of society to talk to each other, which both addresses the political polarization thing, addresses loneliness, addresses many of the core issues that we are facing, and probably also down the road conspiracy theories. So yeah, that was a yeah, no problem. Maybe. I don't know to what extent people are interested in speaking with people who have such different views, but you know, yeah. I think there was a comment in Nikolai afterwards. Yeah, let's start with the first one. So I think it's a very interesting question of what we actually measure with psychological scales generally. And the UCLA loneliness scale is interesting because one of the items is quite strange. It is, even though, don't take me exact, it's not exactly word for word, but it's something like, even though I am with people, you know, I feel lonely, you know. So some people in my psychology department think that is touching upon psychopathology. I don't know whether that's a case. By the way, we control for psychopathology here. So anxiety and depression is controlled for, so that cannot explain why we find what we're saying. So yeah, loneliness, it's a phenomenon, it's a psychological phenomenon, it's an experience, right? That people have, a subjective experience. Whether you want to claim that that doesn't equate to social isolation or something that is more objectively quantifiable, that's a different discussion. And I think these are not perfectly correlated, although they probably are to some extent correlated with each other. I'm not a loneliness expert, so I don't want to this is outside my expertise to really comment on the reasons for that, but I do think things such as increased use of social media instead of in-person contact probably matters. So, in, yeah, yeah. Sure, but there, actually in the loneliness field, there are a lot of interventions that seem to work relatively good, where you bring people together in all types of organizations, clubs, etc. It does seem to help people. So, you know. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are good points, and it's a valid perspective. As you know, it's a very controversial perspective. It kind of aligns a bit with Jonathan Haidt's hypothesis that people nowadays lack social skills, there's been a decrease, etc. I think a lot of the trends are hard to prevent. We have a reduction of religion, religious communities are declining. We have an urbanization trend, which is also far less collective than living in a smaller village. So there's a lot of these big demographic trends that are hard to prevent. So I think we still need to try to do interventions such as you're suggesting. I don't know how to structure them in the most optimal way, but I think it's the best tool we have at the moment. Mikla, you had a question? That's fascinating, yeah. And that really corresponds to this graph. Yeah. Which is interesting because, I mean, for some people, social media also helps them overcome loneliness. People of marginalized communities who have disabilities, etc. So it's not across the board, but yeah, generally speaking, it's a fascinating perspective. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I do think that these two trends that we focus on, they're definitely interconnected. It's probably a cultural syndrome that we are experiencing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you have a question? Yeah, that is interesting. So kind of that might be a confounding variable in terms of political orientation, that this doesn't only measure a moderate political, informed moderate political stand, but maybe it measures disinterest, right? That's what you're saying. Yeah, that's possible. I don't think we capture anything like that in like interest in our variables. I mean, we have denialism, but it's not the same thing at all. So yeah, good point. I mean, that could be it. Hopefully we do still have people who are informed and in the middle of the political spectrum, but might be a good point, yeah. Yeah. And now that you said that, I just want to reconnect to the one point you said about cultural variation. I mean, a political orientation, left-right spectrum is not universal at all, right? Also something to keep in mind, that many cultures don't find themselves on such a scale. So, yeah. But also back to the cross-cultural variation, yes, probably. Again, I'm not an expert on loneliness, but you would kind of assume that more collectivist societies probably score lower on loneliness than Poland is an interesting case. Poland is much more, my partner is Polish, so I see it much more collectivist here than in Norway, for instance, but it's also drastically changing over the past 10, 20 years, right? So it's an interesting case to see how these possible outcomes of loneliness downstream change. Yeah, Valentin. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do think we capture to some extent in this study at least, because we do have denialism, which is, I often disagree with conventional views about the world, and also has some items about distrust about governments. It's not a generalized distrust measure, so we don't have that. I think it's particularly relevant for the loneliness study, and then the question is what comes first. Is it that people make bad experiences interpersonally, and then they start distrusting others, and then that leads them to avoid contact and they become lonely? Or is there some, I mean, mental health research would probably also suggest the opposite relationship, that people, if you get lonely, you get some type of negativity bias, seeking out negative information. So that can really be, it's very possible. And we do have some studies where we find, well, you know, we do have some studies that show that, but that goes against what we are talking about, where social trust is related to more conspiracy beliefs, right? There is some work showing that. So it's not. Yes, exactly. You trust humans more than your government and experts. So yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Well, thank you so much for good questions and discussions, even so late at this conference, and I look forward to dinner today.
To those who meet with us this evening. If you have any question how to get there, if you are uncertain, you can contact me or Maria. But also we wanted you to have a break, so take a rest, and at 7 we see each other in the restaurant which is called Zielonym do Góry, near the Lwowska Street or Plac Bohaterów Getta. Thank you very much.